In this video, I want to give you an introduction to moral rights in Australian copyright law. Moral rights are fairly new in Australia. We've only had them since 2000, and we don't have a lot of authority that explains exactly how they'll be applied in practice. Essentially, moral rights operate parallel to the copyright regime. They're designed to be an inalienable set of rights that are designed to protect authors, directors, and performers. They protect the creators of copyright works, not the producers or the ultimate copyright owner. So moral rights are built on the philosophy that creators deserve some sort of respect, integral to the act of creativity that inheres even once they've signed the economic rights in their work. Normally, creators will assign their rights to publishers and distributors who are better placed to exploit the work. But this leaves creators vulnerable to certain acts that we might feel are harmful, that they no longer have control over. So moral rights are an extra layer of protection that runs parallel to traditional copyright, the economic component of copyright, and protects authors, directors, and performers in Australia from three main sources of harm. The first is about attribution. The moral right of attribution requires that people take care in giving proper credit where credit is due. So authors, directors, and performers have a moral right to require attribution of their work. There's also a right to prevent false attribution, the right to avoid being named as the author when you are not the author. The third type of moral right, and the type that is the most complicated in its effect, is the right of integrity. And this is a right not to have the work subject to derogatory treatment, and we'll explore what that means in a moment. But overall, the important part to know about moral rights is while they can be waived, they can't be assigned. So even after a creator assigns the economic component of the copyright, the exclusive rights to reproduce, to communicate, to perform in public, for example, they still retain the moral rights. This means that the creator can personally bring an action against people who infringe their moral rights, even if those people have the economic right to do what they're doing, or they're protected by one of the fair dealing or other exceptions to copyright, so that what they're doing is not an infringement of copyright itself. Importantly, there is always a defense of reasonableness in moral rights, and to some extent, that reasonableness defense will extend to protect people who are otherwise protected by the fair dealing exceptions, but how that interacts is not always clear. The remedies for an infringement of moral rights, usually the most common, is an injunction. Creators often want to be able to prevent people from harming their work, subjecting it to derogatory treatment, or they want to ensure that they are properly attributed for a particular use. There's also remedies of damages that are available, and the court can order an apology and rectification. So moral rights are really personal rights, personal to authors. The one we're going to focus on today is the moral right of integrity. And the moral right of integrity is the right not to have the work subject to derogatory treatment, as I said. What this means is that creators have a right to object to the material distortion, the mutilation, or the material alteration of their works, or indeed anything else done in relation to their works that is prejudicial to their honour or reputation. And that phrase, honour or reputation, is important because it denotes that there's both potentially a subjective and an objective component to the right of integrity. Honour relating to the way in which an author identifies with their work, and reputation relating specifically to the way in which other people perceive the author through their works. Because moral rights are so new in Australia and we're such a small country, we have very little litigation that explains how the right of integrity will work in practice. It's useful in this case to look to Canada as a country with a relatively similar approach to copyright, a common law system that has had moral rights for slightly longer and has a little bit more litigation that we can draw on. This example is Snow and the Eaton Centre. In this case, the artist Snow was commissioned to craft a series of sculptures of birds that would hang in this shopping centre gallery. So the Eaton Centre displayed for many years the birds hanging from the roof in line with the artist's original vision. At one point, the Eaton Centre decided to tie ribbons around the necks of the flying geese. This is something that Snow took particular offence to. It is something that he claimed was prejudicial to his honour or reputation by reducing it to this crass advertisement of a Christmas holiday period. In the end, the Canadian court agreed with Snow that this was a mutilation of the artist's original creation, that it was prejudicial to his honour or reputation. Some other examples that we might have include the French example of Houston and Société de l'exploitation de la cinquième chaîne. And in this case, it concerned the important film The Asphalt Jungle. And the film was originally shot in black and white. The director of the film had assigned the economic rights, so no longer had the ability to prevent how the film was displayed and distributed. So the director brought suit when the studios who owned the rights to the film decided to colorize it against his wishes and without adequate consultation. In the end, the author didn't have a right against the US-based studios and distributors. Because he had assigned the economic right to communicate and to perform to the public, the director in this case, could no longer control how it was used and displayed to viewers. However, in France, where there is a moral right regime, he was able to bring a claim based on the moral right of integrity, and which he also won. He won on the basis that this too was a material distortion of his work, of his authorial vision, that is prejudicial to his honour or reputation. One of the most surprising rights of integrity cases, and maybe one that marks a precedent that common law courts may not be likely to follow, is the suit brought by Luc Besson against Vodafone. In this case, Besson had created the film The Fifth Element and the character Lilu, played by Milla Jovovich. Vodafone cast Milla Jovovich again in a very similar character to advertise their telecommunications network. Even if it's not an infringement of copyright, Besson argued that by taking a character that he had created and putting it in a crass commercial context, Vodafone had acted in a way that is prejudicial to his honour and reputation. The French court agreed with him here, awarding significant damages to Besson against Vodafone. It's not quite clear that this sort of harm would be covered by the moral right of integrity in other countries, but it is still interesting to think about how far the Australian moral right of integrity might reach in the future. We don't have much to go on in the Australian context. There was an old provision under the statutory licenses that was somewhat analogous to the moral right of integrity. The old statutory license that allows people to record cover versions of existing musical works had a provision that it didn't apply to cover versions that debase the original. So in Scott Music and Colossal Records, the case centered around the use of Carmina Burana in a techno remix. The representatives of Carl Orff, who created Carmina Burana, argued that by taking that classical piece of music and placing it in a techno context, the new creators, the remixers, DJs, had debased the original work. This is something that the federal court was pretty clear about in saying that this was not something that amounted to a debasement under the old test. This is something that could open up the traditional tune to a new audience in a new style, and just because the author doesn't like the particular style in which something is expressed doesn't mean that the original author has an unlimited right to object to reinterpretations of his existing work. So in that case, and the law has changed significantly, but it gives you an idea that courts are willing to draw limits to the extent in which they're prepared to accept claims by authors that their honour or reputation has been harmed by particular later interpretations of their work. One authority of the moral right of integrity that we do have in Australia is the case of Perez and Fernandez. Perez is an international recording artist, better known as Pitbull, and he had an agreement with Fernandez to come over and play some gigs in Australia. The relationship eventually went sour, and Perez decided not to come out to Australia. Nevertheless, Fernandez decided to add a promotional sting to one of Perez's songs. This gave the false impression that Pitbull supported Fernandez, whose stage name is DJ Suave. The court found that this was something that was prejudicial both to Perez's honor and reputation, and therefore breached his right of integrity. Particularly, the court focused on the fact that the recording was taken out of context and that it created a false association that would reflect poorly on Perez in terms of his international reputation. So Perez, like other recording artists, takes specific care about who exactly he endorses. By creating the false association between the two, Fernandez risked damaging Perez's honor or particularly reputation. The court was also sensitive to the fact that the sting that Fernandez introduced mocked Perez in its lyrics, and this could also have been prejudicial to Perez's honor and reputation. So this is an example where the court, in the end, held that this use did breach the moral right of integrity, even though it wasn't an infringement of copyright itself, the economic right. It was an infringement of the moral rights. And this goes to show why the moral rights are so important, because there are many actions which are either outside of the scope of exclusive rights, or many circumstances where the creator no longer has the exclusive rights or has licensed the rights. And the moral rights provide a way in those circumstances to assert that certain uses, even though they're not technically infringing, do infringe the moral right of integrity or of attribution.